tense around Bakhmut, and the word from the Ukrainians is that they are advancing.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's president makes a surprise visit to Canada as he continues to rally support for his country in North America. As Ukraine faces a second winter of war, we're going to bring you a special report from one of the main hospitals receiving casualties from the front lines. Police in New York find large quantities of the opioid fentanyl at a nursery. It follows the death of a one-year-old boy. And King Charles and Queen Camilla are in the city of Bordeaux. They're wrapping up their state visit to France. 7 years after blasting off, a rocket prepares to deliver what scientists hope will be the secrets of how life began on Earth. Hello, I'm Lucy Hawkins. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. We start with some breaking news out of Ukraine, and we understand now that Russia has admitted that at least one Ukrainian missile has hit the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Navy in the Crimean port of Sevastopol. It's caused a fire. Now, this is coming to us from one of the local governors. To remind you, though, Crimea, which Russia seized and illegally annexed from Ukraine back in 2014, has been a frequent target of Ukrainian attacks in the course of the 19-month war. It's strategically incredibly significant as well, and that's why we've seen Ukraine really focus its efforts on Crimea, because this is a vital logistics hub for Russia's war effort due to its location on the Black Sea and, as I've mentioned, the home of the Black Sea Fleet as well. So we are seeing an aerial picture here of Sevastopol, but recent weeks Ukraine focusing its efforts there, and now we just have this news coming to us from a local governor and also from Russia admitting that at least one Ukrainian missile has hit the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Navy in Crimea. More on that story very, very shortly. But let's bring you the very latest on President Zelensky's movements as he tries to rally support for the war effort. He is now in Canada for the first time since Russia's invasion. It's an unannounced visit to thank Canadians for their support, because Ottawa has been a firm ally of Ukraine throughout. You can see him here arriving with his wife Olena and being welcomed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He's got a full day of events in Canada, talks with business leaders and members of the large Ukrainian community who live there, and he's also going to give a speech to the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa. Mr. Zelensky flew from Washington, though. He held talks at the White House. President Biden has approved security assistance for Kyiv valued at $325 million. It includes upgrades to air defences, but crucially not the long-range missiles that President Zelensky has been requesting. While in Washington, he also spent some time appealing to US Congress for more help. We saw House Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying he would not commit to putting a $24 billion aid package to a vote this year. That was shortly after he met with President Zelensky. But speaking at the US National Archives, he said that continued support from the US was vital for the world.
After Ukraine, if we fall, half of Europe would again be in danger of being in Moscow's sphere of influence. But American investment in Ukrainian security and global protection of freedom is working 100%, every cent.
So President Zelensky there. We're going to bring you more on this later this hour, just talking about what President Zelensky has managed to achieve in North America. But this is a trip that is being followed closely back at home in Ukraine, where the fighting continues and the military's need for support is ongoing. With his analysis, here's our correspondent in Kyiv, James Waterhouse.
President Zelensky is enjoying a warm reception in Canada, another loyal ally which has provided its own military support. There is a sizable Ukrainian community in the country as well, but I think we are seeing Ukraine's leader engage in quite a difficult period of diplomacy. He has just left the US, where he was 2 warmly greeted by his counterpart Joe Biden, but there have been discreet meetings behind closed doors around, notably with Republican politicians, where there is growing skepticism over what they see as a continued attack for Ukraine, and their questions over what a Ukrainian victory might look like. So while the reception is warm, there is a lot that President Zelensky is needing to fight for. Just look at the latest military package. It is not the 24 billion offering with missile upgrades that he had hoped for. It is instead far less. It's around 350 million, which includes ammunition, but that is not what he was looking for. And I think more broadly, there is a test here. Ukraine has always said, we will not be rushed in our counter-offensive, not least after they lost a lot of men and equipment back in June when it started. But I think we are starting to see a direct link between progress on the battlefield and increased political scepticism. It's an incredibly difficult period, especially after a falling out with another ally, Poland, over grain. So President Zelensky will be looking to change the tide a little bit.
Mark McKinnon is the senior international correspondent for the Globe and Mail and is in Kyiv. He explained how President Zelensky will be received by Canadians.
Well, the hard truth is that Canada doesn't have what Mr. Zelensky was really hoping to get from the United States, which was ATACMS long-range missiles or anything of the sort, really. His visit to the U.S. was a mixed success. I mean, he was welcomed by Mr. Biden, and there's a new package of military aid, as you mentioned, that's come forth, but it doesn't include the thing that Ukraine has been saying it needs as its counteroffensive makes this very slow progress in the south and east of the country, which is the ability to strike far behind Russian lines. Canada, he'll be greeted as a hero by both sides of the House when he addresses the House of Commons today in Ottawa. There's not much of a divide in Canada, unlike in the United States, over support for Ukraine. At least we haven't seen it yet. But at the end of the day, I was speaking to Mr. Zelensky's office earlier this week, and they don't really have a big ask from Canada. This is very much a trip to say thank you. I'm sure Mr. Trudeau will make some announcements about further military aid, but Canada simply doesn't have the military material that Ukraine needs to make progress in its counteroffensive.
More on Ukraine's counteroffensive coming up, but let's bring you some other stories now. The BBC is investigating a claim that comedian Russell Brand exposed himself to a woman and then joked about the incident on his BBC Radio 2 show. It's alleged to have happened in 2008 in Los Angeles. The woman did not work for the BBC but was employed in the building where the presenter, who's denied any wrongdoing, recorded his show. Graham Satchell reports.
Russell Brand is facing a series of sexual assault allegations, including rape and emotional abuse. The latest is said to have happened in this building in Los Angeles in 2008, where the broadcaster was recording an episode of his Radio 2 programme. A woman who the BBC is calling Olivia claims Brand exposed himself to her in this bathroom. Brand then laughed about the alleged incident minutes later on his show with his co-host Matt Morgan.
What made the BBC think that was appropriate to go out like that? I just don't understand why they didn't investigate this much sooner, given the raunchy, outrageous bits.
In a statement, the BBC said, "We're very sorry to hear of these allegations and we will look into them. We are conducting a review to look at allegations of this nature, and if the woman who has shared her story is willing to speak to us, we would be very keen to hear from her." Russell Brand's co-presenter at the time, Matt Morgan, has also issued a statement. He says, "I was not aware until now of the nature of this encounter. I have expressed my regret now looking back at the impact of the show, and this is a further example. The recent coverage has been very distressing to read, and I reiterate my absolute condemnation of any form of mistreatment of women."
It's the Russell Brand Show, and here's your host, I am!
The latest claims follow an investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4's Dispatches programme in which 4 women allege they were sexually assaulted by Russell Brand between 2006 and 2013. He has denied those claims, but has not responded to this latest allegation. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Live now to Colin Patterson, who is outside New Broadcasting House. So, Colin, many questions, it seems now, for the BBC to answer.
Absolutely. This incident is alleged to have taken place in 2008. And what has now emerged is that in 2019, it was reported to BBC bosses who did not act on it at the time. And today, the head of BECTU, that's the union that looks after behind the scenes in the media industry, Philippa Childs is the boss, and she has said that the BBC should have acted in 2019, and if they had done so, they could have saved a lot of trouble and prevented the situation we are in at the moment. Now, the BBC say the allegations will be included in the inquiry that is already underway, looking into Russell Brand's behaviour when he was a BBC radio presenter between 2006 and 2008. They are asking if the woman who has made the allegations in LA will speak to them, and they say that they want to speak to people who were working in the LA bureau at the time in 2008. We have to say that Russell Brand has denied all the allegations and says that any sexual relationships he had were consensual.
Colin, thank you so much. Let's return now to our top story and that breaking news that we have, and we have an update for you. The governor of Crimea's largest city, Sevastopol, has warned that there could be another Ukrainian aerial attack. He has said it could be imminent, and he is warning everyone to not go into the city centre. So this is after we have heard that there has been an attack on the Black Sea Fleet. Really significant because of the strategically important nature of Sevastopol. Let's take you live now to Justin Crump, who can join us with his analysis. As we look at pictures, Justin, an aerial picture of Sevastopol, can I start by asking why it is so strategically important?
Crimea is obviously incredibly symbolic for both sides. This is where this whole issue really started between Ukraine and Russia nearly 10 years ago. And it is probably a pivot of Ukrainian strategy that they have made it. They want to recover the peninsula. They want to certainly make it untenable for Russia to remain there in a strategic context. But maybe more importantly than that, I mean, the importance of Sevastopol as a naval base for Russia has been demonstrated both by the Russian desire to hold the peninsula and also the use it's made of the base during operations so far. And of course, the Black Sea Fleet is a big component in the strikes against Ukrainian cities, launching Caliber cruise missiles from the fleet that's present in the Black Sea in particular. And so striking back is both practical for Ukraine, strategically important, and highly symbolic as they wage this struggle against Moscow.
So would the ambition here of the Ukrainians be to actually try and isolate the peninsula, thereby making it harder and complicating things and the Russian war effort from there?
Very much so. It's sending a message to Russia that the peninsula is under threat. It is not a secure bastion for Russia. And of course, at the moment, and in fact, really for over a year now, they've been targeting the fleet headquarters. They've been targeting the vessels. They've used a variety of means to do that. They've been targeting air defenses. They've been targeting logistics lines through the peninsula, obviously the Kerch Strait Bridge most prominently, but also the bridges in the peninsula into Zaporizhia and Kherson in the north. And this is all part of this pattern to make it just painful for Russia to hold, to show it's not secure. And the point of the ground operation in northern Zaporizhia at the moment, where the Ukrainians are making progress, is ultimately to bring Crimea much more within weapons range and certainly the supply lines to and from Crimea into weapons range by the Ukrainians. So it's all a large focus on that area.
Justin, managing to strike the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet makes a very good headline. How much do you think this helps President Zelensky as he's in North America at the moment trying to rally support?
I mean, anything by Ukraine that shows they're continuing to bring the fight to Russia, that they are holding the line on the fight, that they have a realistic chance of success in their strategic goals in the war, is obviously useful. I'd say more practically useful were the strikes last week that destroyed a landing ship, which is very important to the Russians at the moment for logistics and supplying Crimea, and also one of their 4 missile-carrying submarines that operate in the Black Sea Fleet. And actually losing those assets is probably more painful for Russia than a strike on the headquarters. It's more symbolic at this point, but nonetheless it shows that Ukraine can continue to strike at the very heart of Russia's presence in the area. And anything like this helps Zelensky's argument that Ukraine needs continued support, it needs continued investment, it needs continued resolve in order to persuade the Russians that they can't just drag out this conflict and hope for Western supporters of Ukraine to give in and allow this to end in a negotiation. So it all sends a message that Ukraine can win. And if you speak to people in Ukraine, of course, they will always say Ukraine will win.
It's always great to get your analysis. Justin, thank you so much. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Qatar Grand Prix.
This is the first submarine known to have been used to bring cocaine from South America to Europe. It's homemade, and it travelled 4,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean.
So the group's just arrived in Kiev, but this is just the very first stage of an extremely long and arduous journey to try and get their children back.
Some of the migrants took with them samples of soil of their homeland. I can very much relate to that. I know how it feels to lose your home.
Now, women also have an identity. Earlier, only men were known by their names. Now, women are identified as individuals too.
Inspiring short films from the BBC.
You're live with BBC News. Let's go to the States now, where police have found a large quantity of fentanyl and other drugs hidden under a trapdoor in a nursery in the Bronx in New York. You can see in these photos here bags filled with enough drugs to kill 500,000 people. Police had been tipped off about the stash after one-year-old Nicholas Dominici died of a suspected drug overdose last Friday at the nursery. 3 other children were admitted to hospital after being exposed to the powerful drug. The nursery's owner and her tenant have been charged with running a drug operation resulting in death. They face a lifetime imprisonment.
We allege that the defendants poisoned 4 babies and killed one of them because they were running a drug operation from a daycare center. A daycare center. A place where children should be kept safe, not surrounded by a drug that could kill them in an instant. When law enforcement officers searched the daycare, they found a large quantity of fentanyl and machinery used to press and package narcotics for distribution. And in particular, they found a brick of fentanyl, about 1 kilogram in weight, right on top of children's playmats in the daycare's closet.
Well, the drug that killed the baby, fentanyl, is a synthetic painkiller that has ravaged the US. It is 50 times more powerful than heroin. In 2010, fewer than 40,000 people died from a drug overdose across the country. Less than 10% of those were tied to fentanyl. By 2021, it's a different picture, with 100,000 people dying from a drug overdose and an estimated 66% of those tied to fentanyl. It is a case that has shocked many in the US, so let's take you straight to New York and join CBS's Jared Hill, who is looking at this story for us. It is a really shocking story, Jared, and there is now an active criminal case. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is something that people could not really imagine happening here. A 1-year-old dying in a daycare because there was fentanyl being kept inside of that facility. What we're learning here is that there's another court date set up for October 5th for the 2 people so far that are in custody, but police are also still looking for a third person here, the husband of this daycare owner, and there are some questions, at least according to the law enforcement, around whether she had been helping him to escape after all of this happened. Remember, when what we're learning here, according to the New York Police Department, is that when this all happened, that she apparently made 3 phone calls. 2 of them were to her husband, and then 1 was to 911, to the law enforcement, to get them to come in and check on these children who were unresponsive. They also are believing, or at least are questioning here, whether she helped him to escape at some point, because there's apparently evidence that he went into the daycare facility before law enforcement got there and then left out with duffel bags full of something. What that is, they don't know. Where he went, they also don't know yet. Back to you.
Jared, thank you so much. Let's take you to a story that we've been covering all week, and the very latest on Nagorno-Karabakh, because anti-government protests are taking place again in Yerevan, that's the Armenian capital, amid anger over Azerbaijan's defeat this week of ethnic Armenian separatists in the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. For a 3rd day, we've seen opposition groups calling for the resignation of the Prime Minister. The latest protests come after the 2 sides held peace talks yesterday. Let's take you to Tbilisi and join our Caucasus correspondent Rayhan Dimitri, who is there. Rayhan, firstly, before we talk about the protests and also the peace talks, what's actually happening in Nagorno-Karabakh at the moment?
Well, so far, it appears that the ceasefire is holding, although earlier today, we heard a statement from Azerbaijan's presidential advisor, who said that Azerbaijan was preparing to offer an amnesty for Karabakh Armenian fighters who agreed to lay down their arms. That announcement came, according to Azerbaijan, amidst reports that Armenian military units have refused to lay down their arms, and they pledged to continue their resistance to Azerbaijani forces. The humanitarian situation is really critical and difficult in the regional capital Stepanakert. Thousands of people who were displaced by this conflict since Azerbaijani forces took control of some of those villages close to the front line. So those people spend the night in schools, churches, very little food. Although today Azerbaijan says that it sent several trucks with humanitarian aid, mainly food supplies.
And Rayan, every day this week we've seen these protests taking place in Yerevan. Some of them have got a little bit violent. We saw some stun grenades earlier in the week and definitely scuffles. There's a lot of anger there. Can you explain to us why there is that level of anger, what the protests are about?
Well, the protests in Yerevan are mainly kind of people are really angry at the Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, for handling this crisis. They're demanding his resignation. They're demanding to open up a humanitarian corridor for Karabakh Armenians so that those who want to flee can come to Armenia. We were getting mixed messages actually from the Armenian authorities. So yesterday, the Armenian Prime Minister said that he didn't see any threat to the security of Karabakh Armenians, but nevertheless, Armenia was prepared to receive up to 40,000 refugees. He said that places were already ready. Going back to the protests in Yerevan, that anger is also aimed at Russia. A lot of people in Armenia feel that Russia had betrayed them, that Karabakh is lost. And this is an extremely painful issue for many Armenians because they consider it their historic homeland.
Rayan, thank you so much for the update from Tbilisi. To Libya now, and the efforts to help people affected by those devastating floods after Storm Daniel brought torrential rain, which caused 2 dams to collapse. It's been really hard to get precise figures on the number of people affected. The overall death toll stands at more than 3,300, but some international aid groups say the real number could be as high as 10,000. And now the International Organization for Migration says an estimated 43,000 people have been displaced by the floods, with a lack of water supply driving people out of Derna. You can see pictures of Derna here. It really is the worst affected city. Let's take you live now to France, to Bordeaux, because over the past few days we've been closely following the state visit of King Charles and Queen Camilla. And you can see there the crowds have gathered in the sunshine for their arrival. They are in Bordeaux today for the final day of this visit. Of course, climate change very much on the agenda of the visit today. They're going to be discussing this with many people in the south of France, and we will keep you across developments from there. When we see them appear, we will take you live to the south of France. An 8-year-old girl has become the first child in the UK to get a kidney transplant without the need for a lifetime of drugs to stop her body rejecting the organ. Aditi received both the kidney and stem cells from her mother, essentially reprogramming her body's immune system to accept the organ as her own. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Aditi's health has been transformed by a double transplant, thanks to her mum and a team at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. She has an extremely rare genetic condition which weakened her immune system and meant her kidneys were failing. So doctors took an unusual approach. First, Aditi had a bone marrow transplant using stem cells from her mum. This rebuilt Aditi's immune system. 6 months later, she had a kidney transplant, again donated by her mother, and her immune system accepted the organ as her own.
Her immune deficiency had to be corrected by having mum's bone marrow first. And because Aditi was able to engraft and accept her mum's bone marrow, that therefore meant that her body could then see her mum's kidney when it was transplanted as being part of her.
Within weeks of the transplant, Aditi was taken off immunosuppression, which means she doesn't risk the long-term side effects of these powerful drugs, which usually have to be taken daily to prevent organ rejection. The family is delighted.
I feel so happy actually, yes, I given the blood cells and the kidney. I'm so happy, yes, of course. I feel perfectly okay, yes. I'm so proud of, yes. And she is amazing, she is doing very fine. Each and every day.
And most of the support, I would say, is from her side.
Yeah.
Because if she was someone who was bogged down by the procedures or by what she listens to on the ward, it would have been much more difficult for us. On the other hand, she was the one who was actually more outgoing.
Aditi is back at school and both her immune system and transplanted kidney are working normally. The procedure is unlikely to be widely used as the double transplant carries increased risks to the patient. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Lovely news for her and for her family. Let's just take you back to France, to Bordeaux, and we have some live pictures coming to us of King Charles and Queen Camilla meeting the crowds there in the southwestern city. They're going to visit an organic vineyard today and a forest that's being studied for the effects of climate change, and we'll have more from there throughout the day.